I built my son this trick UFO walker. It has lasers, lights, and sounds. Learning to weld made this a challenge I wasn't expecting, and now he's able to cruise the cosmos at will. I began by bending a solid aluminum rod into a 10-inch circle. When it was close enough to weld the ends, I took it to quality control for inspection. He seemed satisfied, so I cleaned the ends and began a multi-day struggle with a welder where I failed way more than I succeeded. I had never TIG welded before. Alright, welder, here we go. This was the first crack at the aluminum ring. I had been practicing on scrap aluminum and making them look more tortured than welded. I flipped it and tried the other side. It was together, but I melted it too much, so I added filler and got it strong enough to work. The extra material needed grinded off and the ring needed perfecting. It wasn't quite the circle it needed to be. I wanted it to have 4 legs for ease of building, and Mama wanted it to have 5. She won. I forced a metal roller into a circle and divided that measurement into 5 and had my leg marks. They were cut to 18 inches. Alright buddy, here we go. Daddy don't know what he's doing. Hey, that did not work at all. Quality control was not happy. Alright, we got a leg tacked on. Oh my god, it taken 3 days to do that. Although we got one welded. Oh, bummer. At this point, things were falling apart and I abandoned the first frame. It had hollow legs and I was struggling. I made a new ring and bought some solid aluminum for the legs. I had been burning all the hollow legs to bits. With TIG welding, you have to use a foot pedal to start the weld. The more you push, the more power and heat that's applied to the metal. It takes a lot of getting used to. Also, argon gas must be used for each weld in a very precise amount. I used 2 tanks of gas to build this, whereas a professional welder wouldn't use much from 1 tank. I watched a ton of YouTube welding videos during this build. None really made me better. Practice was much more effective. I'm a hands-on learner. That's the strongest one yet. Alright! It's day 4 of trying to get the hang of this. Before each weld, I cleaned the metal with a wire brush and acetone. With the top done, I made some horizontal leg braces to keep the legs from bending out under weight. A little notch on each end would help them overlap the legs. There's no way to keep professional welders from seeing my videos and my ugly welds. For the sake of this build, I hope we all can pretend this flying saucer came from a planet where metal grows together in organic lumps, rather than being processed in a factory with perfect technique and looks. I'll get better with more practice, and I'm way better than I was when I started. It's plenty strong for my son. For the wheels, I used a few spare casters left over from my camper builds. I marked their height on the legs and cut the legs to the length needed. Here I'm bending the bottom 3 inches of the legs. This would allow the casters to be mounted in an upright position and to roll better. I knocked the dust off the old tap and die set. The bottom of the legs would need threaded to accept the rod connecting nuts. For threading metal, I spin the die about 1.5 turns, then back a 1/4 turn, then repeat. A lubricant really helps the process. This is a sheet of 22 gauge aluminum. For the circle diameter, my goal was to make it 1 inch wider than the opening to the door to our back room. There's a single step there and I didn't want him flying off of it. The saucer is 31 inches wide. This inner circle was cut to 10 inches to match the frame. I started the bottom inner circle cut at 18 inches and recut it a couple times to get it to fit down far enough. I had an image in my head of the angles I wanted it to be. From the top of the upper disc to the bottom of the lower disc, it's 8 inches. I traced its circumference to assure the bottom disc would be the same. Reluctantly, I held it together with pop rivets. I tried gluing it with weld-bond non-toxic glue, but it didn't hold at all. Non-toxic glue seemed like the thing to use for a kid's toy. The pop rivets would compromise the look, but hey, the darn thing can't come apart. That's not acceptable. And I knew I didn't have the skill to weld sheet aluminum, not even close. Those nails used a second ago were there to keep the bottom disc from kicking out while I pop riveted it. They were nailed on the line traced from the top disc. This is a scrap piece of aluminum channel. I cut the sides down to make a much shallower channel. This will be my trim and connecting piece for the discs. Aluminum tends to oxidize really quickly, leaving a black residue. For the welding, it needed thorough cleaning, and anytime I used an adhesive on it, I cleaned it well and lightly sanded the area with a coarse grit to help with adhesion. Here I've added spacers to allow for a small gap between the disc while gluing the trim on. The gap will be for windows around the entire circumference. I didn't have a long enough scrap piece of channel to wrap all the way around. I could have bought more, but it feels good to clean up the stash a bit and use some of the old stuff. While that dried, I added some weight for a strength test. I weighed this temporary walker for comparison. It was 12.78 pounds. I'll share the weight of the UFO later. Meanwhile, quality control seemed mildly impressed. A heavy bead of adhesive made the top disc ready for the bottom. These small bits of foam insulation were cut at an angle and would help maintain the gap between the discs while they dried. I was careful to mind the gaps on the exterior too. Once that dried, I glued the gaps where the foam blocks were removed. Now onto the saddle, or seat, or whatever it's called. I tried the weld-bond non-toxic glue again and made a thick, layered center support with padding for him to ride on. This would be the strong part, while the sides would keep him from slipping through. The operation was moved inside where I sought professional sewing help from Big Sis. She got me started. I didn't know how to begin or end a new stitch, but I was sure I could pass it through and back a bunch of times. She kept going until her fingers hurt. The center part, being glued and layered, was tough to penetrate with the needle. I took it from there. Hey, bud. Is it working for you? Yeah, buddy. A ton of trial and error led to an eventual pattern for the saddle walls. This material has a stars and planets design on it. I found it at Walmart for about $6. The sides were sewn to the center part and extra material was later trimmed off. I used some tape to help hold the position while I stitched it up. With a basic understanding of sewing, I returned to the garage to sew these loops over the top ring. I wanted to leave some aluminum exposed. I needed something solid for the disc to adhere to. This is a seal left over from the rocket camper build. I cut off the large bulb part and kept the rest. It has backward-facing metal built in that helps it grab onto thin metal surfaces. I'm using it as a safe and durable cover over the sharp metal edge at the top of the upper disc. That shiny fabric is a stretchy material that made easy work of covering the ugly black seal. This was one of those moments where I felt lucky to find the shiny fabric. I fashioned 3 covers before this for the top opening, and this one looked the least homemade. The rest of the loose fabric was glued to the aluminum and then a thick bead was applied to the ring. As the discs aren't structural, they just kind of sit there. The heavy-duty adhesive worked great for holding them on. The next day, she was solid as a rock.
Side effects.
I made a tiny center point jig and drew a line all the way around. With the help of fabric tape, I marked 1-inch increments all the way around as well. A 1/4-inch drill bit seemed large enough for the windows. This is a template for the wheel fenders. I cut and tried 7 variations before settling on this shape. I used a slightly thinner aluminum left over from my last camper build. It was painted, so I had to remove that. The wire brush wheel made short work of the paint. The ever-present eye of quality control kept me honest. 3 pop rivets in each fender kept them straight. And as much as we can, we keep it fun. I couldn't have been happier with the fenders. For good measure, I made 3 of these braces and attached them from the frame to the lower disc using pop rivets. I was seeking a tad bit more stability out of the UFO body. Some duct tape held them in place while I added the glue. The UFO will have 2 strands of color-changing lights placed near the windows and a strand of bright white lights mounted closer to the saddle to blast bright light down towards his feet. This is a battery pack holder for those strands. I'm using a drill to create a slot for the Velcro strap to slide through. There's a magnet mounted inside, and this strip of magnet will connect to that one for easy removal. I peeled and stuck the lights on. My body blocked much of the camera shots unknowingly. It was light work, but tight work. A large part of me wanted to keep the saucer as authentic looking as possible, but I wanted it to make space sounds. At this step, I had to remind myself that this wasn't for me, and I went forward drilling 4 large holes in the top to slide these sound recorder buttons in. I'm the one who's the fan of the UFOs and the like. My son can't yet say he'd rather have a truck-shaped walker. I'm just taking advantage of him not being able to talk yet. I want to see the UFO floating around the house. Here I'm cutting a hole for the front-mounted rechargeable laser. I fashioned a piece of aluminum into a holder. The goal was to easily slide it in and out for recharging. The holder had to be the diameter of the laser shaft, but not wider. The laser works by pressing a button. This holder will squeeze the button and allow the laser to stay on while he's in the walker. Now with the holes made, I began polishing the UFO for a shinier look. I had no idea that I had no idea about polishing. Like welding, I learned a ton in this process. I started with this non-toxic polish. I figured you just put it on and wipe it off and it's going to be a mirror. So I did that and it was only mildly better. I guess that was it, and I moved on to installing the sound buttons. They had an on-off switch on the sides, and I made sure to keep the adhesive away from it. I found that the laser holder was too long, so I halved it and installed it with adhesive too. Something was eating at me regarding the shininess of the body. I wasn't satisfied. I bought a polishing kit for the drill and tried again. Still, it didn't really work well. I resorted to YouTube. I wasn't understanding something. And it kinda looked like crap. What I learned was that even though the aluminum looked flat and relatively scratch-free, it still needed sanded with a grit so fine that I didn't even know it existed. Before this project, I thought that the world tapped out at 800 grit. Turns out, if you want that mirror look, you'll need about 7,000 grit for aluminum. That was what I was missing. The 3,000 grit on the drill made this wild pattern that I almost kept. I started noticing a shininess not seen before too. The fenders received the same multi-stage sanding, and I really saw the mirror for the first time when sanding the underside with a little polish. When I used 5,000 then 7,000 grit, that worked like magic. I found the mirror.
Greetings, Earthlings.
That sound came from one of the buttons. We used a fogger to enhance the laser and tried to hold him still long enough for a couple quick clips.
Cole!
Cole, hey bud, come on, sir.
Well, it's not going to be working anytime.
In this clip, the X-Files sound is playing and we have Star Wars programmed on one of the other buttons. I couldn't let it play due to copyright, unfortunately. He is on the move, ain't he? You are on the move, big bud.
I've never picked it up. It's really light.
The UFO weighs 11.02 pounds with all the equipment. He really likes chasing the laser beams. The reality is he likes to run around in the UFO for 5 or 10 minutes at a time, then is ready for the next thing. At this point, he seems to like his little bike that his uncle got him just a little bit more. Since I'm a motorcyclist, I'm okay with that too. What are you doing, bud? Apparently, he was trying to abduct his sister. A little secret is that this is the second walker I built for him. He outgrew this one. It fit him well at 2 months, but is way too small now. I hope he'll take an interest in building things and hang out with his old man in the garage. He's a new motivation for my builds, and a treehouse in tiny western town will be built once he's old enough to use them. For now, I'm enjoying what I can. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please consider sharing it. I have plans to bring 1 million more things to life, and will keep building with your support. Thank you. Cole! Cole! Right here, buddy!